All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Planet Soccer Podcast. I feel weird
Woo!
doing the intro.
I know, more
It's so
energy. You got to bring more
frequently
energy.
Welcome
There you go.
to the Planet Soccer Podcast. As always, co-host here, Dylan, up in Michigan, Reed down there, and yet again another new background.
It's not
room
new,
for recording in
technically.
Texas.
I've been here before, but I'm recycling now. So that we have good Wi-Fi.
You've run out of new places.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and that is good. Hopefully, we are a little bit more cohesive when we can see each other and not have and not have really long pauses in between each other's sentences.
Yes. So fun fact, this bottle, we had a birthday brunch yesterday, and we had a leftover bottle, and I just took it for myself.
Attaboy. Hope the boss doesn't watch.
Hey, Jason, good job in court today. All right, what are we talking about today? Or do you want me? Do you want me to put it in my word, or do you want to explain?
Yeah, you probably should
explain the situation.
So we are going to, over the next probably between now and hopefully the start of the transfer window, kind of go on a little bit deeper dive on what the transfer window is for all of our American fans trying to pick up the sport, or are fans of the sport but not overly familiar with the inner workings of the sport in Europe. Today we're going to kind of kick that off on just a general overview of what the transfer window is, generally how it works, and the different impacts it has on the game, and how it differs kind of from American free agency, because that's probably the closest. Not even really. It's probably closer to a trade deadline, but
it's close to
it's
nothing.
all in dollar
it's close
values.
To nothing.
So it feels like free agency. Yeah, it really is completely different. It feels archaic, like at its core, and we can kind of dive into that.
Feels something worse than archaic. I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
not my words.
But
that comes from a book.
We'll dive into that today and just kind of give a general overview on what the transfer window is and how it kind of operates.
Yeah. So Dylan, I made it through the prologue of Soccernomics. Didn't even make it through the prologue before I wanted to do an episode on what I read. I love it so much. It's kind of become a cliche in the sport, Soccernomics. It's considered by far the best book to read to kind of get an idea of, I don't want to say inner workings, but it's how the whole shebang comes together, from front office to fans to players. It's not, I read How to Watch Soccer by Ruud Gilt earlier this year, and that was more like on the field player centric. This is holistic. It's like Billy Bean stuff for soccer.
This almost sounds like a book I would almost maybe read half of.
It's very, very good. Highly
I'm not
suggest.
a reader, but this sounds very up my
Make
alley,
sure you get
I am way more
Soccernomics, Why European Men and American Women Win and Billionaire Owners Are Destined to Lose.
Oh, I don't like that title.
Yeah.
As a Newcastle fan,
I haven't gotten to that part yet.
We will win, please.
All right. So I asked ChatGPT to start us off. Explain the soccer transfer market to an American in a sarcastic way. This is what it came up with. So the soccer transfer market is basically a fancy way of saying players changing teams. Just like in American sports, players in soccer have contracts with their teams that last for a certain period of time. When that time is up, or if the player or team agreed to terminate the contract early, the player can move to a different team. Now, unlike American sports, where there are salary caps and other restrictions on player movement, soccer is more of a Wild West. Teams can offer whatever they want to try to lure a player to their squad, regardless of his contract situation. Sometimes these offers are financial, like paying the player a higher wage salary than their current team. Other times it's about playing time or a chance to compete for trophies. The transfer market has become a bit of a circus in recent years, with teams shelling out huge sums of money to sign top players. It's not uncommon for a team to spend over $100 million on a single human being, which is pretty insane if you ask me, but hey, it's their money, not mine. There are also a bunch of different deadlines and rules around the transfer market. For example, there are 2 windows each year where teams can buy and sell players, one in the summer and one in the winter. There are also rules about how many foreign players a team can have on their roster. So sometimes teams will have to sell players to make room for new signings. Overall, the soccer transfer market can be a bit overwhelming if you're not used to it, but just think of it as a big game of musical chairs, except the chairs, it's teams, and instead of music, it's money.
Alrighty, thanks for listening to another episode of the Planet Soccer Podcast. We really are all doomed because that was a very good, cohesive, comprehensive explanation.
It was. You ready to get even better? Let's get into actually the discussion. And I'm going to lead you off with...
Yeah, this is what we get paid the big bucks for.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to lead you off with a saying, gentlemen prefer blondes. And the story that this book leads with is an unnamed scout went to scout players. I forgot which country it was in, but he went to watch a certain player that wasn't blonde, but the blonde kid on the field stuck out. And he stuck out because he looked different than all the other players. And naturally, that person is going to stick out. That kind of segues into a bunch of different aspects of the transfer market, whether it's certain nations being overvalued, certain nations being undervalued, positions, things of that nature. There are so many silly mistakes that are made in the transfer market. And I think the most, the easiest way to describe it, the way it is right now, is to talk about the craziness that's going on, the sums of money that are being shelled out, the returns that teams get on their money, and overall just the ludicrous nature of the transfer market. Dylan, when you think transfer market chaos, what does your mind go to?
Fabrizio, Twitter.
What signing, as far as just like ridiculous amount of money for a player that didn't live up to the hype?
I mean, this feels unfair because there have been injuries and off the field issues, but first one that comes to mind has to be Neymar. When we were talking $250 million for a single player that hasn't won the Champions League yet, like it. I love Neymar. Like, I am a Neymar defender,
Same,
almost to the death. But $250,000 for Neymar, especially in 2017, before this, not before the explosion of values, but really we've seen
that's kind of what kicked it off.
The values, right? But we've seen them skyrocket since then. If somebody were to pay $250,000 for a player like not Neymar, but a player like Neymar, similar age, talent level now, it would be less outlandish than it was then. And he's won hardly nothing there. So Neymar is the one that obviously jumps out, but that seems like a pretty obvious shout.
The $250 million mistake won't be made again, but there will be $100 to $120 mistakes made. Basically, it comes down to market incompetence. There are several factors that go into panic buys, trendy buys, things of that nature. And the first thing I want to start off with,
Chelsea.
Yes,
Chelsea
exactly. We'll get into what Chelsea's done. Because it happens so often, I want to start with saying a new manager wastes money. What do I mean by that? When a new manager comes in, say, for instance, Conte was in, whoever we get next, if he plays a different system than Conte, even if he plays the same system, he's going to want to clear house, probably take a loss on players that maybe Tottenham bought for 40 million, have to sell them for 20, to fit his system, to fit his squad, to get a squad that he likes. So, I mean, it makes, in baseball, you don't play different styles. If you have a good team, you have a good team. Same with football. You can be a more under center coach, but if you have a good quarterback, it really doesn't matter whether he's under center or 5 yards deep. What it comes down to is soccer. It's a constant orchestra of movement. It doesn't stop. It stops once in the match, and that's at halftime. So players rely so much on each other, and a manager has to have players he can trust that are able to play with each other. And a lot of times that requires a clearing house of the current squad. And for Tottenham, who's had 12 managers in the last 20 years, 12 managers in the last 20 years, that's a lot of wasted money, even though Tottenham's net spending over a long period of time hasn't been that bad. Does that make sense to you, Dylan? I think that's kind of the first time maybe you've heard that concept, but it made sense to me.
No, yeah. I mean, I think you had like you're like, as you said, you're kind of forced to because a lot of times you're not coming into a situation that necessarily fits you. I think we by default the first thing that comes to my head when I think of overspending the transfer market today is Chelsea. And I think their turnover of managers throughout the season, leading to overspending in January. The initial manager that was brought in at the start of the year overspent to try and fit his system. That system wasn't the same system the guy that was there in January had. Like it all kind of compounds, and that's how you get yourself in serious financial trouble. And that's where being a Brighton is almost advantageous in a way
Runs so well.
because you have to be run well to compete. Chelsea for so long has gotten away with and been able to spend their way out of trouble. They've been able to spend their way to success. Brighton has does not have that luxury. So they have to bring in managers that fit their current players and bring in players that fit their current manager and not have that like panic or overreaction to a couple of bad matches right before a transfer window opens or right before a season ends. And I think that's where, some of those bigger clubs can get themselves into trouble. And that's almost, I honestly hadn't thought of it this way until we kind of started discussing it. That's almost where these outlandish dollar values in a weird way are almost long term, I think, going to balance the playing field a little bit because you will see those bigger clubs, PSG, Juventus, um, Chelsea, are starting to get them.
I was
Barcelona
going
are
to say
starting to get
Barcelona,
themselves
the
in,
poster child of financial
starting to get
issues.
them into some financial issues, and those clubs are going to likely, as we've seen now, Chelsea taking a step back because of those. Oh wait, it's not because of those financial issues. They just can't play on the field. But I think long term it's going to be because of those financial issues, and it's going to give an opportunity for those clubs that are really well run, like the Brightons, like the Villas of the world, to kind of
To keep competing.
step into to step into those roles. Not long term. Chelsea will always be more successful than Villa. It's just the way of the world. There's nothing we're going to do about it. But it's going to allow them to better them for 2, 3, 4 year periods at a
Yeah.
time when those Chelseas or Barcelonas get themselves into that trouble.
You bring up a great point with Brighton, and I'm so glad you brought it up. I was actually going to talk about this a little later, but I'm going to bring it up now. Clubs that do well in the transfer market or just do good business overall, and the example that they gave in the book was Nottingham Forest of the 80s. They sold their
Mm-hmm.
best players when they were at their best. Now, that
Yep.
sounds counterintuitive and it sounds like bad business, but players are never going to be of higher value when they're at their peak. It's just like the stock market. You don't want to hold on to a stock when it's skyrocketed for the last year and a half. You want to sell it off because the crash is coming. It's going to
Right.
come and it's going to fall. And Brighton selling Basuma, I don't think 25 million. I think Basuma probably could have played another year at Brighton and gone up to 40, 45. Caicedo is going to go for a ridiculous fee. I think Trossard could have gone for even a higher fee if he had stayed for the rest of the year. Pascal Gross has had a great year. Now, I don't know if he can replicate it with anybody other than Brighton because of De Zerbi's system. It relies so much on long distribution from the center backs, but he's upped his value a ton. Who's their striker? The Irish kid.
Oh my goodness.
Look that up while I keep talking. The key is selling players at
Marsh.
Huh?
Sully.
No, that's
Marsh.
not it. That's not it.
Oh no, he's a midfielder, right?
It's
No, he's like a wing
Evan
midfield.
Ferguson.
Who's there?
Evan Ferguson.
Oh yeah, no, that was not going to be the first name that came into my mind. But yes, he is. Yes,
He's had a completely breakout year, a 2004 birth. So what does that make him? 18, 19 years old? Is that right? I think so. He's 18 years old.
I think he's only 18.
That's crazy. I think
and it was a late breakout. It's been a late breakout. Like it wasn't early. It's been this like second half of the season, and he's got what 5 goals, 6 goals.
Yeah, he's making a run for sure. So that's kind of a short point, but it's a point that needs to be made. Is a Barcelona is never going to sell their best player at the peak of his career, but that's how a team like Brighton will stay financially competitive. They'll bring in 3 replacements for the sum of that price that will end up, or promote academy players to eventually then be sold off for 50 million. Speaking of Chelsea, stars of recent World Cups or European championships are overvalued. You see that every single World Cup year, every single international year. This year it was Enzo Fernandez. Who else? I'm sure there are other examples.
He's not even close to $125 million
No.
player. That's all I'll say.
He was playing on a field with Messi and Argentina, Di Maria, and Alex McAllister, who was having. I mean, the team was just so good. Like, all he had to do was get it distributed to those guys. But that's a tangent. The worst time to buy a player is in the summer when he's just done well at a big tournament, flat out.
Or in January after a December World Cup.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So it's kind of interesting, like to piggyback. One of the surprise not departures or non-signings in January for me for that exact reason was Gvardiol. Had had the best World Cup of any defender in all of the World Cup, and he's at a club that. Not that Leipzig is cash strapped by any means, but they're a club
rich.
that they typically
they have rich owners.
but they typically sell at the peak. Like Leipzig typically isn't holding on to their best players throughout their peak to the downturn of their career. And not that he's anywhere near the downturn. I want to say he's only like 21 maybe. But that's one where they, in my opinion, could have and should have cashed in for a ridiculous amount of money. He would have gone for $100 million in January. No questions asked. And I don't know if he'll go for $100 million ever again. And I think he's a phenomenal player. But that's where that was one of the kind of surprising, like post World Cup, post major tournaments of a team that is known for selling players at their peak, kind of missed an opportunity to. I think part of it was partially the timing of that window. It was in the middle of Champions League. They were still in Champions League. Yeah. They still wanted to make a push. He still wanted to be there. So that's.
I think the risk of him decreasing in value is low too. Like, he'll still be a $100 million player.
Yeah, because he's 21 and he's a center back, so he's not going anywhere in value because they're valuable until 30. But there's a chance he does decrease in value, and I don't think he really is going to increase in value a ton. You're not going to see center backs going for $150 million 2 years from now. Well, at this rate, you might. but that's one where I personally was kind of surprised they didn't cash in due to that tournament. But I think that's another example, and like I started to say, we've talked about it almost ad nauseum, how different this World Cup was, and how it really truly impacted the landscape of your international football this year.
Yeah, I think Virgil van Dijk is the highest center back transfer ever at 84 million euros from Southampton to Liverpool. Another example.
Yeah, Gvardiol would have blown that out of the water. But
you think so?
Yeah.
Another good example, it's not World Cup, it was the Euros, but Gareth Bale took a Wales side to the semifinals, I believe. And then Real Madrid bought him for 132 million pounds, which was more than double what they got Mesut Ozil for, who was probably a better player for them. So basically the lesson is, don't put too much stock into a 1-month tournament to where you dish out more money than a person will make in their lifetime on a single human being that may or may not pan out. Please and thank you. Okay, let's get to the funny one. It's the certain nationalities are overvalued. Dutch, English. Those are probably the big two. What?
Brazilians? I think Brazilians are vastly like
there are two different types of Brazilian transfers. There's the Brazilian transfers that come from Santos for like low fees, and then there's the Brazilians that get traded amongst European clubs. Yes, good point.
Once they're in Europe,
yeah,
and they've been proven in Europe, more often than not, you're paying a premium
Anthony,
because
first one that comes to mind. Neymar. Yeah.
Neymar again is the first one that comes to my mind. But yeah, Anthony, like because they play, and this was a different episode that we almost did tonight. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants this week. Uh, but
Hey, we're
about
organized. This is
is
good.
it
We're going good.
is it eye test or is it statistic based? And man, do the Brazilian players more often than not pass that eye test? They
Yeah.
play Jogo Bonita, a beautiful game, a beautiful style of football. It is very attractive or very foolish if you're Anthony doing 18 step overs just to pass the ball to the other team. But it's things that make good hype videos, get the fans excited. So for me, in England, English players are way overvalued more than anybody else.
Especially
But for
Premier
me,
League
the
team to
second
Premier
one,
League team. Yeah.
yeah, but for me, the second one, the second thing that came to my mind was Brazilians because we've seen some astronomical fees for some like Coutinho. Um, I think that fee was something ridiculous, over 150 million as well.
Mhm.
So there have just been some ridiculous Brazilian fees that we've seen, and I think it's because of that eye test. It is very attractive, it is very sexy, but
This will be a clip.
typically
Go
it
ahead.
doesn't get the same results on that club European level.
Yeah, the same on-field results. Here's a
Mm-hmm.
clippable moment for you. Brazilian soccer player is what a French chef is considered. It's always going to look really good. It's highly regarded. The history's there. I'm not always going to love a French Michelin star restaurant. I'm always going to love a Japanese fusion Michelin star restaurant, a Mexican Michelin star restaurant, infinite number of Italian. However, French, they can get a little wacky sometimes with it. Brazilian players can get a
Yeah.
little wacky with it sometimes.
No, that's honestly
That's
one of
not
the,
from
the
me. That's
better
from Alex
comparisons I've
Belos
heard.
in Football, The Brazilian Way of Life, his book.
Oh,
So I can't take credit for
damn,
that.
that was good. I liked that. I wish that was you, but it wasn't. But you
Yeah.
can still clip it like it was. But no, that's honestly that's a very good comparison because um, they all similarly always get the hype. Everybody always wants to talk about it. Everybody always wants to act like they like it. But then there's a lot of people that are like, oh, that's too flashy for me. I don't really enjoy that. I want more meat and potatoes. Like I want that English CDM. I want Declan Rice more than I want Coutinho. Like there is that. There's two very different factions there, but it seems to be the people with all of the money value that flashiness a little bit more for whatever reason.
Yeah. Transitioning a little bit to implement the wage structure. And this won't go too much longer, guys. If you're still watching, we appreciate it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button for us and give the video a like. There's actually a big study that was done since 2000. They've taken net transfer totals for teams compared to wage structure, and the difference that the transfer basically spending and net spending had on a team success was little to none compared to what their wage bill actually is. Now, that's the case because there's so much emphasis put on spending $100 million on the 22-year-old up and coming center back that the 30-year-old center back has a much lower transfer value because he's perceived to be at the end of his career, even though center backs peak around 30. He's going to get sold for less than that 22-year-old will, but he's going to demand the higher wage bill because he's established. He's won things potentially. He knows how to play in different leagues against different players, which makes a lot of sense, but I've never thought of it that way. So don't look at a team spending to calculate their success. Example, Chelsea, which I'm sure they have a huge wage structure as well. But look at a team's wage bill, and oftentimes the top teams will be top in both. But Manchester City is a great example. Their net spending over the last 15 years is very good compared to what they've won, how much they've won. But their wage bill is the top in the Premier League. Kevin De Bruyne earns just a ridiculous amount of money every week. Your thoughts on
So
that?
fun fact on wages. Speaking specifically to Chelsea, I knew we were the rough idea of what we were talking about today, so I knew wages would come up. Chelsea has 13 players that make higher wages than the highest earner at Newcastle.
That's really bad. That's not good
That's
news for
terrible.
Chelsea.
Like, and you couple that with 600 million pounds in less than 12 months net spend. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand how they can even dig themselves out of this. And we could and probably will this summer do a whole episode on Chelsea, hopefully, possibly with our good friend Nick Watanabe, who understands the transfer market better than both of us, probably,
And who's writing a
understands
book?
financial fair
We
play,
learned this week.
and who is writing a book. Certainly understands financial fair play better than both of us. So hopefully he can come on, because financial fair play, that is one thing to leave our American audience with. It is very convoluted. You think the luxury tax in the NBA is hard to understand? I do, slightly. Try figuring out financial fair play, and good luck. If you don't have a PhD, I guarantee you can't fully explain financial fair play to me.
It's fucking
You can explain the
BC
general
calculus.
concept.
It's BC calculus in sports finance. I mean, it is just
You
mind-bending.
can explain the general concept. You can tell me over 5 years your net loss can't be lower than, but man, you can't like. I don't know how Chelsea's getting out of this one if it's just about 5-year net loss, because they are going to have a massive net loss when you look at wage bills like they have and net transfer spends of over 600 million.
And not being in Europe next year, which if you make Europe,
at
that's
any level of Europe,
yeah, that's a huge
like,
revenue boost.
They're not even close. They're closer to the relegation than they are Conference League, I think.
We love it. There's still a mathematical scenario in which Chelsea gets relegated.
I don't know if there still is today.
Oh,
I think West Ham
games.
had to beat City today.
That's right. You're right.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's too bad.
Well,
we can still hold out hope that they finish the season closer to relegation than they do.
I don't think they're winning another game this year.
I hope not, because that's a free 3 points for us on the last match day.
I think we did a really good job of kind of summarizing the gist of the transfer market, where the pitfalls can be, where we kind of, in the current day and age, where we see teams slip up, and kind of the current trends, when to buy players, when to sell players. The next couple episodes of the transfer market, I don't know if we'll do a whole one devoted to agents and agents' influence, because it's a lot more than in the States. But we will do an entire episode on the subject of relocation in the transfer market, because it is the single most important variable as to whether a $100 million player that comes from Italy to England, or from England to Germany, or wherever, succeeds. They have to be relocated properly and implemented into that culture, into that city. So I'm really excited to talk about that one. Dylan, you want to close this out?
Oh man. All right. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, stitch, duet, share, follow. Yeah, I don't know. This is why you do these, because you got this down, and I'm struggling to get through them all. But we appreciate you guys listening. We will catch you hopefully one or two more times before I make my way over to England.
When are you leaving?
To watch Newcastle secure Champions League football. I leave Wednesday afternoon.
Okay.
Wednesday the 10th. And then I will be there until the 22nd.
Up the tune.
I'm going to the Brighton match. Going to the Brighton match to see us secure Champions League football. Up the tune, baby.
That would be lit.
How way?
We'll see you guys later.
It will be.